pointed out that many of these quotes from English literature were rewritten with other famous writers when translated into other languages, as seen on Redeem. The English card has Shakespeare, while the German card has Goethe, and the French version has a piece from Stendhal. While it's true that quotes from literature have made for clever nods to the past, abandoning the practices was the correct move for the game. To use Ant's music analogy, it's fun to pay homage to the musicians who have inspired you, but do it too much, and you risk becoming a simulacrum. Using literature exclusively for flavor text on Magic cards would furthermore make it the equivalent of a cover band. The next category is world building. These flavor texts help give depth to the planes and provide context for the environment outside of the frame and artwork. Back in Theros block, world-building flavor text gave way for Magic to repurpose Homer's Iliad into the Theriad, a miniature epic of the Greek version, which appeared on 15 different vanilla creatures in the block. The flavor text here let the creative team cleverly narrate the story arc of the 3-act block in a condensed manner, and rewarded any of the players who took the time to find and organize all of the pieces. The 2 Ravnica blocks also heavily featured flavor text that gave a sense of place and depth to the cityscape. Courier Hawk is a great example. The Orzhov started using hawks as messengers in order to bypass the many toll roads and bridges that dot Ravnica. Soon the service became one of their most profitable businesses. From this innocuous little flyer, we learn quite a bit about the business tendencies of the Orzhov Syndicate, as well as the civic structure of Ravnica. Similarly, Duskmantle, House of Shadow is often quoted as many players' favorite flavor text. In a space where there is no room, in a structure that was never built, meets the guild that doesn't exist. Through this line, we learn that the Dimir are highly secretive and undercover, which helps elevate the art and give it a sense of space. World-building flavor text is also responsible for one of the game's most beloved characters. Gatecrash gave us Totally Lost, and with it came both an established naming convention for homunculi and a succinct reason for which this one was particularly frightened. Players clung to the gag and have been anxious to see more of the frightened fellow ever since. Phobelthip had always hated crowds is a perfect line, and Ant Tessitor knew it. Writing for Conspiracy Take the Crown, he played with the idea for jeering homunculus and reversed the roles. Micklethid had always hated crowds. To his credit, the second line was added by someone else later, which I think weakens the interplay. Next we have dialogue. In this category you can find just as much world building as character development, as these distinctions tend to blend into one another here. Clear a Path, for example, gives us a look into the morality of the Boros Legion from the perspective of a confused two-headed ogre. "Why do guards always look surprised when we bash them?" asked Rurik. "I think they expect a bribe," said Thar. This flavor text is witty and good. It's humorous and works double duty without being excessive. Dialogue, however, is usually where you find the bulk of cheesy and melodramatic writing. A lot of Jace quotes, for example, end up painting the character as dull or arrogant and lead to shunning reactions from fans. When done poorly, dialogue flavor text is a bit too expository and reminds me of something that came from the room. But there are some gems. Monastery Mentor is one, with "Speak little, do much." Felden of the Third Path's flavor text, "She Will Come Back to Me," is a quote that opens up the character's tragic backstory and also describes the mechanic of the card. And Riptide Chimera's "I Want One" provides a fun insight into Kiora's character in just 3 words, and sends the viewer back to the artwork with a new perspective in mind. Something like this can also fall into my final category, whimsy, which encompasses all jokes, gags, and puns. Goblins, for example, dominate this realm. As much as I love this ongoing tendency to paint goblins as dim-witted and suicidal, I think there's room to explore other elements of this tribe in a clever way. Goblin Chieftain from M10 did this quite well, with the text, "We are goblin kind, heirs to the mountain empires of chieftains past. Rest is death to us, and arson is our call to war." But this neat insight was undermined 2 years later with "It's Time for the Smash Smash" song, which I think took away from the Gobbo's motivation a little bit. One-liners live here too, like the flavor text for Hex. The whimsical, though, has a time and a place, which brings me back to my interview with Ant.
Something that I consider to be bad flavor text, going off of what I said before, is anything that distracts away from the card or belittles the card. So my go-to example is always Gorilla Type,
Yep.
And the only reason I say that is not because I don't like humor. I love humor, and I've written some humor into the game, but the art itself is not humorous. The art is showing this like really aggressive tiger gorilla thing, and it just happens to be in a pose that would facilitate a joke.
Yeah.
And once that joke line was written in of "I want a banana this big," you're doing a disservice to the card only because you're making that art that might have been done to be serious.
Yeah.
And then you kind of like mess that up by writing something goofy.
I agree with Ant. Humor is good, but in small doses. It works in Conspiracy and usually on any card with art by Jesper Ising or Steve Prescott. I'm all for the lighthearted in Magic, but anything that ends in a badumts or could double as an elbow-nudging dad joke doesn't really age well. Our last category is standalones, which I define as any line of flavor text that could easily exist outside of the context of the game and still work as a solid piece of writing. These are just as hit or miss as the whimsical ones. Go too deep and philosophical, and it reads like a magnet from Pinterest. But with some elegance and craftsmanship, I believe Magic can be the source of some fairly poetic lines of text. Squandered Resources is one such card. He traded sand for skins, skins for gold, gold for life. In the end, he traded life for sand. Something like this can stop and make you think. Boldware Intimidator is another one of my favorites in this category. Now everyone knows what you are, as it invokes the mechanic of the card in a way that leaves me questioning even myself. Am I a warrior or a coward? Damn man, sometimes I don't know. Which brings me to Rancor. Going back to the drumming analogy, Rancor is the John Bonham of flavor texts. Hatred outlives the hateful, does it all, subtly, and ties every piece of the card together. It elevates the card in the same way a solid drum line drives a song. Bonham's skill, just like a strong writer with a gigantic vocabulary and control over their language, could easily have him playing something far more complex. But he refrains, keeps it simple and melodic, and doesn't overextend. He plays to the song. Rancor's flavor text does the same thing. What's written here is not an exaggeration about how angry the enchantment makes your creatures, nor is it some zany pun. Rather, it serves the one-word name of the card and indirectly describes exactly what it does while also working as a standalone piece of text that, like Squandered Resources, just makes you stop and think. I asked Ant why Rancor is such a marquee card for its flavor text.
The flavor text of hatred outlives the hateful reiterates to you, hammers home into your mind, if you want to think about that solid bass drum, that this card makes creatures pissed over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But the final kind of like, if you want to keep going with this drum analogy, the final kind of like flourish and fill that really puts this over the top is that not only does that line of text fit on one line, so visually it's very appealing, but also it has a more deep psychological lesson behind it. That, like, anytime that flavor text can impart like a life lesson on you,
Yeah, right.
it is even it, like that's when it starts to get absurd, right? That's when it's no longer just a game. Like, it's something that can really change the way you think about your own life.
To tie this all together, I think good flavor text is one that gives harmony to the rest of the card. It's not just the standalone pieces. Well-written dialogue or whimsy pieces can be knockouts too. Sometimes giving harmony means keeping it simple, Bonham style. Other times that means going to 11, like Thomas Pridgeon opening up the Mars Volta's Wax Simulacra. Certain cards, like Blazing Archon, deserve this kind of colossal rhythm section, one that explodes and soars over the top of subtlety. Other whimsical pieces, like the time-traveling dialogue on Return to Ravnica's Inspiration, is akin to the silliness of a song like Born on a Horse by Biffy Clyro. The cowbell here works because it fits the bouncy tone of the song. And still, sometimes, the best flavor text is one that is absent. Cards like Wrath of God and Time Stop turn Oracle text into a work of art by themselves. These cards are the Never Going Back Again by Fleetwood Mac, the drums and bass that do the most by sitting one out. And So the best flavor texts, like Ant said, make everything else on the card better. They are the drummers that play for the song. Thanks for watching. I am a proud partner of Card Kingdom. Use cardkingdom.com/studies as the affiliate link to support the show and get magic product faster than a courier hawk delivers the secrets of the Orzhov Syndicate. Very special shout out to Ant Tessitore for the interview. If you would like to listen to the full thing, go to my website, touristicstudies.com, and go to the articles tab. You will find a link to the full 20-minute long-ish conversation that I had with Ant about all things flavor text and writing for Wizards of the Coast. It's a really good conversation, so I recommend that. Also follow him on Twitter. He also does a show with Mike Linneman called Snack Time. If you're not on the Snack Time podcast grind, I don't know what you're doing out there, Vorthoses. It's a great show, high energy. Those guys are really good, and you will very much enjoy. If you enjoyed the small bits of interview that we had in this video, then you'll really love Snack Time. So get on it. Also, of course, cardkingdom.com/studies if you would like to support the show indirectly while buying cards. And if you want to support the show directly, go to my Patreon page. Just $1 really helps me out. It lets you know that you really dig my stuff. So check that out as well. All right, and finally, I would like to give one special shout out to the Orcish Librarian on Twitter. Orcish Librarian, the Orc. He's a great writer. He has a bunch of series that he likes to tweet out, one of which is he puts flavor text on cards that don't have flavor text, and they're always very witty and very good. It's great writing, it's great magic content, and I would like to push the Orcish Librarian into your radar, okay? All right, guys, I'll see you very soon for the next video. Cheers! The way I heard it was like this. Hero was playing Legacy at some SCG event. Villain's board is 2 lands and 3 polluted deltas, with a Dark Confidant in play. Villain also basically has a grip full of cards, some number of which are presumably counterspells and Force of Wills. Hero draws his card, then tanks for a bit. He calls the judge over. He points to a card in his hand and asks, "I can name Dark Confidant with this, right?" The judge confirms that he can. Hero casts Pithing Needle. Villain allows it to resolve. Hero names Polluted Delta. Alright, so that anecdote is the perfect reason to love bluffing and Magic. It also sets the scene for one of the game's most narrow and effective designs, and a card with a great history of corner case bad beat stories, Pithing Needle. Today I'm going to sing an ode to what may be my favorite one-drop artifact, and posit that its presence in Standard is both always welcome and long overdue. Let's start by clearing up any confusion. That first word is pronounced pithing, and it comes from the real-world medical procedure of piercing the spinal cord in an animal as to experiment on its living tissue. Pithing will either paralyze or euthanize animals, and if you're sickly curious, there's a million videos on YouTube of medical students pithing frogs for practice. The cattle industry used pithing as a means for extermination until it was banned in the UK in 2001 as a cause for the spread of mad cow disease. Somebody should have told old Anton Chigurh here that what he was doing was actually illegal.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Pithing, as you can see in both the Pete Venters and Anthony Palumbo versions of this card, is different from a lobotomy. The latter used ice picks to mush up brain matter in the frontal lobe, and provided much of the dramatic tension in Ken Kesey's 1962 novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and the 2010 DiCaprio thriller Shutter Island. Here, however, the focus is on the nape. Palumbo gets at this idea well. The small shaved patch above the victim's neck hints at the looming procedure. I tell you all this to clear up any confusion about the card's pronunciation. Pithing is a real thing and has nothing to do with pie. Confusion also surrounds this card's ability, which has led to controversy and a myriad of learning moments for Magic players over the years. New players struggle with the needle. It's a tall order to know exactly what qualifies as an activated ability when you're just starting out with the game. We can take a great example from the last time Pithing Needle was legal in Standard. Return to Ravnica and Theros blocks composed the format. It was an era dominated by mono black decks running Underworld Connections as their main source of card advantage. Lesser experienced players fumbled and named Underworld Connections when wielding needles. The problem is, the aura gives the ability to the land it's enchanting, and not the enchantment itself. which permitted their opponents to still draw cards. More savvy players knew to name Swamp. Not only would that stop the card draw engine, but it would force mono-black players to drop their future connections on Mutavaults, effectively taking out 2 of their threats with 1 card. However, Pithing Needle subtly doesn't hit mana abilities, which still gives players headaches. Elvish Mystic gets through the needle, but Arbor Elf doesn't. Aetherling gets hit by the needle even though its abilities require mana, and a Blood-Rushed Gore Clan Rampager falls victim too, even though it never actually hits the battlefield. Players new to Legacy often forget that Lion's Eye Diamond is a mana ability, leading to some embarrassing moments for even experienced players. Maybe the most famous bad beat story thus far involves Pithing Needle and the angry Cyclops of the Gruul clan. It was January 2016 at a modern event in Charlotte hosted by Star City Games. Bradley Carpenter down 1 game to Agorio's Vengeance deck piloted by Bob Huang, plays a turn 1 Needle and names Gristlebrand, the deck's main win condition. A few turns later, Carpenter plays another Needle, this time naming Borborygmus, the secondary win con. Of course, Borborygmus Enraged is the actual card name.
So it sounds like he just named Borborygmos, not Borborygmos Enraged.
Since the version without the epithet is a legal card name, Huang doesn't correct Carpenter. Soon thereafter, Huang dumps his hand of lands to Borborygmus Enraged's activated ability, capitalizing on the hiccup and killing Carpenter in the process. This caused a controversy regarding rules lawyering. The majority of players argued in favor of Carpenter. Both players understood his intentions, and this corner case situation could only happen because of the naming format of the legendary creature. Matt Sperling, on the other hand, took Bob's side and posited that your opponent is not responsible for remembering the game rules for you. What's trickiest about this situation is the rules regarding naming. Technically speaking, you can name any card with Pithing Needle, but that doesn't mean it will have its desired effect. Longtime vets of MTGO know this all too well, and have named Pithing Needle with Pithing Needle by accident.
Oh my... you didn't just see that. You didn't see that.
Ultimately, Carpenter's mistake was a verbal one, and not one of strict gameplay. Even though his intentions were clear, there was no negotiation of meaning between the players. Probably due to this debacle, Wizards updated the rules in April of 2017 with section 3.6 on card identification and interpretation. It states that both players are responsible for clearing up ambiguity, and that a name isn't necessary as long as there's a single card that everyone is on the same page about. Players that have been punished by naming Shackles as shorthand for Vidalcan Shackles are likely happy to see this too. Regardless, all these bad beats make way for great learning opportunities. Magic is a complex game, and Pithing Needle opens the way to make players better, even if the way presents itself as Spartan at times. After all, where Pithing Needle thrives is precisely in the corner case scenario, which leads me to my final point. It's been a few years since the card has seen play in Standard, and I'm not alone in thinking that it's time for its triumphant return to the limelight. Pros of the game have been echoing this sentiment since the domination of Gideon, vehicles, and the copycat combo. Pithing Needle answers all of these threats. We were teased at a reprint with the Aether Revolt masterpieces, but as of Amonkhet, there are no needles on the horizon. I see Pithing Needle as one of the most elegant answer pieces in the game. It's the perfect sideboard card that responds to threats with precision. Against aggro and creature-based decks, it does virtually nothing, but it can keep mid-range and control strategies in check. It allows Wizards to lay off banning as a means to hose haymakers, and promotes a healthier ecosystem reliant on sideboard strategy to win games. The card can also be adapted to any story-driven environment, and given that it's an artifact, it can be played in any deck. In essence, Pithing Needle is a skill-intensive card that rewards knowledge of the game and archetypes of the format to carve out incremental advantage. And, for lack of a better pun, it can just get in your opponent's head.
Was Myra giving him some information there?
Just remember to enunciate your card names, and if given the window, always go for that polluted Delta Gold. Thanks for watching. Great news for everyone involved. I'm doing a giveaway sponsored by my patrons. I am giving away this masterpiece Pithing Needle. Looks super good in person, I must say. All you have to do is be a patron to participate. So if you sign up for my Patreon at the $1 level, You'll get a bunch of perks and you'll be entered to win this. I will be giving it away in time for my next video, so check out for that. Also, shout out to my highest tier patrons. You'll see them highlighted in the credits. If you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed Pithing Needle, let me know in the comments below your best Bad Beat story with Pithing Needle wielding that needle. Ooh, this card is so good. I just like it a lot. Anyway, yeah, I like to keep this short and sweet. This is where I promote my Patreon page. It really, really helps. I have a couple new goals. I'd like to hit 150 patrons by the end of next month, so, you know, do your part. And every dollar helps, of course, helps me keep creating, and it helps my well-being. It also helps future giveaways like this one here. So again, thanks for supporting. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Cheers!
Grizzly bears are a household name for Magic the Gathering. They've been around since the very first set and have been a measuring stick for a particular kind of small green creature. As of this release, the card Grizzly Bears have not seen a reprint since 10th edition in 2007, but its name continues on. Let's go through the history of Grizzly Bears, from the original one in Alpha to the most recently printed comparable cards. Put together, these cards tell a story of a changing game, from a time when non-creature strategies reigned supreme to the intentional powering up of creatures today. Before we dive further, let's define what we mean by grizzly bear. A creature commonly referred to as a grizzly bear has an exact casting cost of 1 generic and 1 colored mana with stats of 2 power and 2 toughness. A 2/2 white knight, or even black knight, is technically not considered a bear even though their power, toughness, and converted mana cost match. The reason is the knight's mana cost. Since each knight has to commit 2 of its color in its casting cost, it doesn't fit what we'd like to call a standard grizzly bear. Another example of a creature that can be mistaken is Abbot of Carol Keep. This creature's casting cost meets the requirement, but it's a 2/1 with a couple of added abilities. Because its base power and toughness is 2/1, it isn't a conventional bear. We only want to focus on creatures that have exactly 2 power and 2 toughness and only cost 1 colored and 1 generic mana. For over 20 years, grizzly bears have become the gold standard of 2-drops in Limited. During the early days of Limited Magic, players started prioritizing the importance of a mana curve, with the sweet spot mostly being at 2 mana. Since the 2-drop grizzly bears was the most optimal common creature in that slot, players deemed any creature at 2 converted mana cost a bear. This caught on, and even though we haven't seen a printing of the actual grizzly bear's card in over 8 years, the name is still used to identify a 2/2 for 2. Of course, there were other creatures that competed for this coveted slot. Red had a creature similar to grizzly bears, but it unfortunately came with a drawback and never saw a reprint after 5th edition. As a matter of fact, grizzly bears saw several functional reprints before the other colors had their first direct copy of a grizzly bear. It wasn't until Portal in 1997 that a color outside of green finally got a bear of its own. For several years, Magic's power level in creatures was stagnant, but in late 2000, the set Invasion released and brought a huge change. To this day, Invasion is considered to be one of the greatest sets ever. It reintroduced multicolored cards and made an entire block out of that theme. Split cards were created, and more specifically, 2-mana creatures became powerful. Starting with the cycle of allied colored knights, Invasion also introduced the first bear with upside, Kavu Titan. This bear was instantly recognized as a card powerful for its time and would still be solid today. At this point, most of the other colors, except for white, still didn't have proper equals to grizzly bears. Black had Spineless Thug in the previous block, but it came with a major drawback. Red and blue each got a bear in Invasion, but both cards had significant downside that made them unplayable in competitive formats. Magic would continue this trend, often with restrictions to attacking or blocking for red, and no quality in sight for black and blue. White finally got another direct copy in Mercadian Masks in the form of Rebels, and a reprint of Knight Errant in 7th edition, but it still took until Mirrodin before White saw any bear with upside. Note that even at this time, cards like Nomadic Elf demonstrated that rarity correlated with power. Even if Nomadic Elf was better than a Kavu Titan when played as a 2/2, the Kavu was clearly a much more flexible and powerful card. In fall 2001, Odyssey was released and a cycle of 2-drop bears were printed at Common. With base stats of 2 power and 2 toughness for 1 generic and 1 colored mana, each color had its own hound. Red got the weakest of the bunch with Mad Dog. Black got Filthy Cur, a creature fitting for Suicide Black strategies of old. Blue had slightly less downside in Phantom Whelp with Pseudo Vigilance. White got the runner-up in Patrol Hound. And of course, green had the best hound of the cycle with Wild Mongrel. At the time, Graveyard and Discard were the premier strategies in Standard. Since the Wild Mongrel had an optional ability with a convenient cost of discarding a card, it ended up fitting perfectly in Blue-Green Madness decks. With its sidekick, Aquamoeba from Torment, the Hound was a formidable foe. Not only was the dog a powerful enabler for Madness and Graveyard strategy, it was also very hard to kill. Because its ability gave 1 additional power and toughness, plus a color of the controller's choosing, it was difficult for opposing players to kill even with the best removal spells available. For years after Wild Mongrel was printed, many grizzly bears with upside were printed in green, but while not all directly comparable, no card had as much standard dominance as the Mutt. For a long time, Wild Mongrel was known as the best 2-drop ever printed. In the years since Odyssey, Magic has greatly evolved as a game. Creatures have gotten better, spells have gotten worse, and bears have gotten even stronger. White and green kept seeing more bears with upside, while the other 3 colors were still trying to catch up. One of the biggest players was Tarmogoyf. This sleeper card did not see a lot of success while legal in Standard, but Eternal formats showcased this card's full potential. Due to its ability to grow its power and toughness, Tarmogoyf is technically not considered to be a grizzly bear, but it did overtake the title of best 2-drop ever from the revered Wild Mongrel. Magic saw another huge change in creature power level when Magic Core Set 2010 was released in 2009. This revolution refined the fundamental rules, added more terminology, focused more on top-down design, and made core sets printed yearly. Creatures started becoming more powerful, bringing in even more new bears. Unfortunately, one of the victims of this change was the actual Grizzly Bears card, which it did not receive its first ever core set appearance and hasn't to this day. On December 5th, 2011, Magic lead designer Mark Rosewater released an article titled New World Order. In this announcement, Mark stated the game was becoming too complex and that in order for it to flourish, they needed to simplify the game. One of the major changes was to reduce the complexity in common cards. Because of this new structure, more bears were printed, including Black's first bear, Walking Corpse. In the last 2 years, we've seen the printing of grizzly bears with the greatest upsides yet. Heir of the Wilds was an excellent aggressive threat in many green-based standard decks. Herald of the Pantheon was a sweet enabler for competitive fringe decks and kitchen table decks alike. Dwynen's Elite found a home in both modern and legacy elves. And even Snapping Gnarlid had its day in Teamer Battle Rage combo. White saw an exponential amount of bears with upside too. Seeker of the Way saw its path in many Jeskai tempo decks. Ondu War Cleric became a common bomb in Oath of the Gatewatch drafts. Soulfire Grandmaster even saw some play as a 1 or 2 of in both standard and modern decks. Of course, out of all of these 2-drops, the best is Duskwatch Recruiter. With 2 sides both benefiting a creature-based strategy, the Werebear was played in practically every standard collected company deck. Another creature as powerful, if not even more so, is Sylvan Advocate. Even though Collected Company is no longer legal in Standard, both Duskwatch Recruiter and Sylvan Advocate have set a new level for 2-drop creatures. That brings us to the Grizzly Bears of today. It's surprising how powerful and relevant they've become. As a matter of fact, Red finally got its first bear with no drawbacks in the form of Falconwrath Reaver from Eldritch Moon. So who knows what the next sets will bring. We hope this video brought you a new perspective to the game. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and check out our other videos. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Did you know? Goblins are one of the most ubiquitous creatures in Magic. They have been with the game since the very beginning and have almost seen an appearance in every set. One of the first creature lords to be introduced to the game was Goblin King. Printed in every base set starting in Alpha all the way to 10th edition, this Lord of the Goblins has gone through several different iterations. At first, his creature type was Goblin King. Then in 3rd edition it changed to Lord to not give itself its own +1/+1 and Mountain Walk buff. When 9th edition released, Goblin King underwent another creature type change. This time, Goblin was added, making him a Goblin Lord. The rules text was also rewritten to say other goblins get +1/+1 and Mountain Walk. This officially made it where Goblin King can give other Goblin Kings +1/+1 while preventing itself from receiving its own bonus. Finally, with its very last printing in 10th edition, Goblin King's creature type lost the Lord tag, leaving it as Goblin. When core sets were revamped with Magic 2010, the Goblin King was replaced with Goblin Chieftain. This new Goblin Lord still gave other goblins +1/+1, but this time it would only be goblins that player controls. Another major change that came with yearly core sets was the removal of a complicated combat ruling called Damage on the Stack. When damage on the stack existed, it allowed players to assign their attackers and blockers combat damage to be put on the stack. This meant players could cast spells or activate abilities after damage was assigned and before damage would be dealt. Because of this ruling, many creatures with non-tapping activated abilities were very powerful. One among them was a goblin called Mogg Fanatic. For a long time, Mogg Fanatic was one of the best 1-drops for any red deck thanks to its activated ability, which reads, Sacrifice Mogg Fanatic. Mogg Fanatic deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Because of damage on the stack, Mogg Fanatic was a very versatile 1-drop that would frequently kill opposing 2 toughness creatures, 2-for-1 2/1/1s, and even deal a damage to an opponent before killing an opposing 1 toughness creature in combat. Because of its versatility, the little guy was a prominent creature in practically every red aggro deck of every format imaginable. Unfortunately, when the rules changed, Mogg Fanatic got much worse. Today, the Goblin does see some play, but it's not nearly as prevalent as it once was. Perhaps the most popular Goblin character in all of Magic's lore is Squee. Introduced in the artwork on the card Call of the Wild from Weatherlight, Squee was also featured on the cover of Inquest magazine. Squee was one of the original crew members of the skyship Weatherlight. For the uninitiated, the Weatherlight was a storyline that lasted 13 sets. Many of the characters in this saga had official cards printed, including Squee. As the first legendary goblin, Squee Goblin Nabob immediately saw play in Standard as endless fuel for Masticore, a popular artifact creature at the time. In Vintage, players started seeing Squee's potential for card advantage in decks with Bazaar of Baghdad, but the format Squee excelled in the most was Extended. Cards like Survival of the Fittest from Exodus and Solitary Confinement from Judgment worked extremely well with the Goblin Nabob, since Squee would continuously return to hand to then be discarded over and over again. Because of his many synergies in several different formats, Squee was one of the most sought-after cards in Mercadian Masks. Today, Squee is no longer played in competitive Magic, but he is fairly common to see in Commander. Another legendary goblin that has seen a rise in popularity is Kiki-Jiki Mirrorbreaker. From the get-go, Kiki-Jiki saw play as a tutor target in Tooth and Nail decks during the Mirrodin Kamigawa Standard. However, after Champions of Kamigawa rotated out, the Mirrorbreaker fell to obscurity. Several years later, when Commander became a format, Kiki-Jiki started seeing a slow comeback. But his big return truly came in 2011 when the first modern Pro Tour debuted. Thanks to Samuel Estrati, who piloted a blue-red Splinter Twin combo deck to a Pro Tour championship, Kiki-Jiki was back on top. With Pestermite and Deceiver Exarch, Kiki-Jiki and the deck's namesake became the main parts for the Infinite Creatures combo. In 2012, Birthing Pod decks began to dominate Modern. One of these Birthing Pod decks used Kiki-Jiki with Restoration Angel as a way to win with Infinite Angels on the board. As a major component in two of the best combo decks in the format, Kiki-Jiki was the most valuable red card after Lightning Bolt in Modern. However, the legendary Goblin's glory days slowly faded away when combo decks with Birthing Pod were banned in 2015, followed by Splinter Twin a year later. Fortunately, as is the trend, Kiki-Jiki is still very popular as a general or a combo piece in Commander. From 1997 to 2004, World Championship decks were a supplemental product that featured the best decks from Magic's most prestigious tournament. One of those decks was Wolfgang Eater's Goblin Bidding from Worlds 2003. A deck containing nothing but goblin creature cards and a handful of spells, it was the first ever goblin tribal deck to succeed in Standard. The deck's success hinged on an aggressive start, and if a board wipe like Wrath of God or Mutilate was cast, the sorcery spell Patriarch's Bidding would reanimate all goblins from the graveyard back into play. Usually when this happened, the game was over if Goblin Warchief was one of the reanimated creatures, giving all goblins haste. To most players, goblins are known as a great tribe to play in competitive and casual formats. However, there were a couple of goblin cards that were literal bombs in draft. For starters, there was Sparksmith, a 2-drop common that would beat out most rares as a first pick in Onslaught draft. Sparksmith would dominate the battlefield by pinging away any 2/2 just by having one other goblin by its side. This scenario was fairly common since Onslaught was the first set to introduce 2/2 morph creatures. Onslaught was also a very creature-focused block, with goblins being the main tribe for red. So first picking a Sparksmith was a no-brainer, as picking up more goblins in later packs was a simple task. Another limited format all-star came in Mirrodin, the block after Onslaught. With equipment being introduced for the first time, Spike Shot Goblin was the perfect creature to test the potential of these new artifacts. Starting at 1 damage to either a creature or player, the goblin could then increase its damage output by 3-fold from a measly Bone Splitter. Tack on more equipment and the game would be won solely on a buffed up goblin creature, which was fairly easy since equipment cards were bountiful. One of the most polarizing cards in the game is Steamflogger Boss, a 3/3 goblin for 3 generic mana and 1 red mana. The card's rules text reads, "Other Rigger creatures you control get +1/+0 and have haste. If a Rigger you control would assemble a contraption, it assembles 2 contraptions instead." As a card from Future Sight, its primary purpose was, quote, "to be a card from the future," end quote. Many cards in the set had a unique card frame and several new mechanics were introduced, which was all meant to depict what the future may look like for Magic. However, the Steamflogger Boss had a different goal. Mostly conceived as a joke, Magic R&D never had any intention to make contraptions or the term assemble work. Unfortunately, Magic R&D's attempt at humor didn't go over well with the community. The reasons were pretty clear, as the Goblin Rigger was practically useless since no other contraption cards or riggers were in the set. But the biggest problem was its rarity. At Rare, many players excited to open a booster pack would get a Steamflogger Boss with rules text that didn't make any sense. Disappointing, to say the least. Despite its many shortcomings, Steamflogger Boss has a cult following, and there was much debate as to when, or even if, contraptions would finally be introduced. However, that changed when Mark Rosewater revealed Steamflogger Boss to be in the latest Unset, Unstable at this year's San Diego Comic-Con. With Steamflogger Boss officially returning in Unstable, it is assured that we will finally see how contraptions truly work. That was a lot on goblins. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but luckily there are many more interesting stories to tell in a future installment of Did You Know Magic? This episode was voiced by me, Jimmy Wong. If you enjoyed this episode, then you should check out my podcast about Commander at youtube.com/theCommandZonePodcast and on Twitter at CommandCast. You can also check out our gameplay series, Game Nights, where we take the multiplayer format in all its forms and play it in a professional and fun setting. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again.
Did you know that the very first merfolk ever printed were merfolk of the Pearl Trident way back in Alpha? That's right, the fish have been here since the very beginning, and they've been swimming their way into players' hearts for over 20 years now. Envisioned as a way to get sea-based creatures involved in the game, merfolk were the first blue-based tribe to ever see play. Thanks to the power of the formidable Lord of Atlantis, a 2-cost creature that gave merfolk +1/+1, and Island Walk that you will still recognize today, merfolk saw play from the very beginning. And have they ever? Today, Merfolk is a premier deck in Modern, where it continues a history of success in nearly every format, from Standard to Extended to Modern to Legacy to even Vintage, where Joel Lim won the 2013 Vintage Championship with a Merfolk deck, aptly named Fish. On the subject of fish, you'll notice that today it's a term used interchangeably with merfolk. But it wasn't always that way. In fact, when the deck first came onto the Vintage scene in the year 2000, thanks to the quirky Rootwater Thief, the card designed by Invitational winner Mike Long, it barely contained many merfolk at all. But the unique ability of the Thief got players tinkering with the archetype. And before long, Manta Riders, Tidal Warrior, and trusty Lord of Atlantis were beginning to swim onto the scene. The next evolution came with the printing of Standstill in Odyssey. Thanks to the early merfolk and the presence of creature lands like Fairy Conclave and Mishra's Factory, the deck could apply pressure while threatening to draw 3 cards at any time. But as the metagame evolved, most of the merfolk actually left the deck, even though the tempo decks that remained retained the fish moniker. Merfolk as we know it today began to take shape with the release of Lorwyn in 2007. Suddenly a whole new crop of powerful merfolk entered the scene. Backed up by counterspells like Daze and Force of Will, the new breed of fish paired perfectly with Aether Vial and honorary merfolk Mutable. The deck began to take shape. It had made its presence known, but it hadn't yet broken through. That changed with the release of Zendikar in 2009 and the unassuming Spreading Seas. By messing with the opponent's mana and gifting the merfolk player an unblockable path to victory, the enchantment aura became a mainstay. 2 sets later in Rise of the Eldrazi, Coralhelm Commander came along and gave the deck another potential lord. With its increasing playability, merfolk won a few major tournaments. In 2010, Tomoharu Sato won Grand Prix Columbus with Legacy Merfolk, splashing black for Engineered Plague and Perish out of the sideboard. Later that year, Marin Leibart made the top 8 of Pro Tour Amsterdam with a version of the deck, modified for the now discontinued extended format. After the banning of Survival of the Fittest in Legacy in late 2010, Merfolk spent more than a year as the deck to beat in the format. In 2013, the Commander deck Mindseas added a new fish to the ranks, True Name Nemesis. This powerful creature made such a huge impact that it won a Legacy Grand Prix in its debut. Modern was created in the winter of 2011, and while Merfolk was a popular contender out of the gate, it took some time to find its footing. But while Modern underwent its many shifts and turns throughout the years, Merfolk quietly kept swimming along and picking new pieces as it went. Without a doubt, the biggest addition was Master of the Pearl Trident in Magic 2013, which suddenly gave the fish a powerful 8 island walk granting lords. But Cavern of Souls wasn't far behind. Thanks to more recent additions, Merfolk finally won its first major Modern title at Grand Prix Copenhagen in 2015. That brings us to Fish in 2016. It looks a lot different than it did back in 2000. But the way the games play out aren't all that different. The ideal start is an Aether Vial to keep the creatures flowing, all the while using mana to disrupt opponents from playing their game. As the creatures fill the board for fish, games can end in the blink of an eye as a Lord of Atlantis or Master of the Pearl Trident pump the team and let the deck finish the game out of nowhere. A deck with so many redundant pieces, Merfolk is hard to shut down, and its success over the years is testament to that. So whether you're playing Modern, sleeving up for Legacy, or willing to make a splash into Vintage and fuel your school perhaps with a Black Lotus on the start, now you know your fish. Good luck keeping your head above water. No, wait, we're Merfolk. We want to keep our heads below water so we can breathe. And if you'd like to hear Did You Know Magic, did you know there was more Did You Know Magic videos to be seen in the Did You Know Magic playlist? So make sure to click and explore and subscribe to Gathering Magic for more. I'd like to thank Corbin Hosler for writing this script. You can find more of his work on the coverage team for Wizards of the Coast or on his weekly podcast, Brainstorm Brewery. You can also check out my work over at Tolarian Community College, where you can find everything from Magic the Gathering product reviews to deck techs to introductory lessons to help you become a more informed Magic the Gathering player. Hope to see you there.
Our good old black-green dredge deck. Really love this deck. Of course, this is a budget version of the Jund dredge deck.
This is probably the graveyard deck of the format.
They're teaching dredge to our children in schools?
Dredge has been around for a while. It's been a very powerful strategy historically.
It is dredge that gets it done. It's been a long time since we saw this deck take down a tournament.
Did you know? Dredge was the brainchild of Mark Rosewater. Designed as the keyword ability for the Golgari Guild and Ravnica City of Guilds, Dredge is